My son handed a brand new access card to every employee at the grand opening of his second store. Then he looked at me, smiled, and gave the last card to someone standing behind me. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it had been an honest mistake. I stayed where I was, still clapping with everyone else, still smiling, still waiting. The applause filled the room as cameras flashed around the bright red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Reporters from the local paper snapped pictures while customers wandered through the aisles, admiring polished shelves filled with tools and hardware. I looked down at my hand. The old brass key was still resting in my palm. Its edges had been worn smooth over the years. That little key had opened my son's very first store every morning before sunrise. Now it couldn't open a single door in the building standing right in front of me. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet moment would change everything I believed about family, sacrifice, and growing older. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the very end, and let me know what city you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and reading your thoughts. Tonight, I'd like to share the story of a father who postponed retirement because he believed helping his son succeed mattered more than slowing down. My name is John Carter. I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I worked as an electrician in a small Ohio town. My hands have more scars than I can count, and every one of them reminds me of a family I helped keep warm, a business I helped keep running, or a neighbor who needed someone to show up when the lights went out. My wife, Linda, likes to joke that I never learned how to sit still. She's probably right. When retirement finally came within reach, she had already started making plans. She wanted to visit our grandchildren more often, plant tomatoes behind the house, take slow drives through Amish country every October just to admire the changing leaves. I wanted those things too. Then our son Ethan walked into our garage one Saturday afternoon carrying a notebook, a floor plan, and more hope than money. "Dad," he said, "I found a building downtown. It's nothing special yet, but I think it could become something." He spread the drawings across my old workbench. "I just need a little help getting started." I looked at Linda. She smiled before I even answered, because after 46 years of marriage, she already knew what I was going to say. "All right," I told him. "Let's build your dream." Neither of us realized that one simple promise would someday leave me standing inside my own son's celebration, holding the only key that no longer belonged. Linda and I agreed on one simple rule before we ever stepped inside Ethan's first store. We would help him build it. We would never make him feel like he owed us anything. That mattered to us. Neither of us believed parents should keep score with their children. If love ever starts looking like an invoice, something has already gone wrong. The building Ethan bought had once been an old farm supply store on the edge of downtown. Half the lights didn't work. The wooden floor creaked with every step. The roof leaked whenever Ohio had a heavy spring rain. Most people saw an aging building. Ethan saw opportunity. I saw my son's future. Every morning, I'd arrive before 6. I unlocked the front door with that little brass key and switched on the lights one row at a time. For a few quiet minutes, before the phones started ringing and the customers arrived, the store belonged only to me. I'd make a pot of coffee, walk every aisle, straighten shelves, check inventory, sweep the front sidewalk. Not because anyone asked me to, because that's simply how I believed a business should begin each day. Linda became part of the store in her own quiet way. She baked banana bread for the staff on Fridays. She remembered every employee's birthday. At Christmas, she wrapped small gifts for everyone, making sure no one felt forgotten. The younger employees started calling her Mama Linda. She always laughed and told them they were making her feel older than she already was. Those were good years, busy years, happy years. The first store didn't become successful overnight. There were weeks when Ethan worried about payroll, months when every unexpected repair felt like another mountain to climb. Whenever he looked discouraged, I'd clap him on the shoulder. "We'll figure it out." And somehow we always did. As the business slowly grew, Ethan hired more people. Young managers with business degrees, marketing specialists. Inventory software replaced my handwritten notebooks. New systems appeared that I barely understood. Whenever someone offered to explain them, I'd smile. You youngsters have this under control, I joke with a smile. I'll keep doing the things I know best. No one laughed harder than I did. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first quiet change I never noticed. Not because technology replaced me, but because little by little, I quietly stepped backward every time the business stepped forward. I told myself that was exactly what fathers were supposed to do. Help, encourage, then move aside when their children were ready. I never imagined that one day, moving aside would become so easy, that no one would even notice I'd disappeared. The first year passed faster than any of us expected. The store stayed open. The bills got paid. Customers came back. Little by little, the empty parking lot we used to worry about began filling up every Saturday morning. Ethan still thanked me almost every day, sometimes with words, sometimes with nothing more than a tired smile as we locked the doors together after closing. That was enough. I never wanted praise. Watching him succeed felt like enough of a reward. Linda noticed it before I did. One evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sun disappear behind the maple trees, she stirred her tea and asked a simple question. Have you noticed Ethan doesn't ask your opinion as much anymore? I smiled. That's a good thing. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. Is it? I nodded. It means he's becoming the owner instead of the son who needed his dad. She didn't argue. Linda rarely argued. But she had a way of becoming very quiet whenever she saw something I couldn't. As the months passed, the store became more professional. Employees started wearing matching uniforms. Weekly staff meetings replaced our informal conversations. There were spreadsheets instead of handwritten notes. Performance reports instead of instinct. I was proud of all of it. Honestly, watching Ethan grow into a confident businessman was one of the greatest joys of my life. Still, there were little moments I didn't know what to do with. One morning I arrived before sunrise, just as I always had. The alarm panel had been replaced. A young assistant manager named Tyler hurried over before I could touch anything. I've got it, John. He smiled politely while entering a code I'd never seen before. They upgraded the security system last week. Oh, I stepped back. I guess they forgot to show me. Tyler shrugged. I figured Ethan already had. His words weren't unkind. In fact, he probably forgot the conversation before lunchtime. I remembered it for weeks, not because I wanted to know the code, but because, for the first time since we opened the business, there was a part of the store I couldn't access without asking someone else's permission. A few days later, the employee schedule moved onto a phone app. Someone mentioned it during lunch. Everyone pulled out their phones. Everyone except me. I still write mine on the calendar at home, I joked. The younger employees laughed politely. Then the conversation moved on. No one offered to help me download the app. No one thought to ask if I even had it. Again, no one was being cruel. Life was simply moving forward. And I was standing still. I kept telling myself that retirement was coming soon anyway, that none of those little changes really mattered. Looking back now, I think life rarely changes all at once. It changes one small moment at a time. So quietly, that by the time you finally notice, the world you thought you belonged to has already learned how to keep turning without you. Linda never asked me to stop helping Ethan. She knew better than anyone that work had never been just a paycheck to me. It was purpose, routine, a reason to get out of bed before sunrise. If I wasn't fixing something, building something, or helping someone, I felt restless. She understood that. So instead of asking me to slow down, she simply made sure there was always a hot dinner waiting whenever I came home. One evening, while we were washing dishes together, she looked over at me. Do you remember what you wanted to do after you retired? I smiled. I remember. You still want to travel? I do. The Blue Ridge Parkway? I laughed. You never forget anything. She dried another plate. I've been saving brochures. I looked toward the small stack sitting on the corner of the kitchen counter. National parks, historic railroads, little bed and breakfasts in Tennessee and Virginia. Places we'd promised ourselves we'd visit someday. I know, I said quietly. We'll get there. She nodded. I know we will. Neither of us realized how many times we had already postponed that conversation. A week later, Ethan called while Linda and I were eating breakfast. Dad, I've got some exciting news. His voice sounded like it had years before when he first found the old building downtown. We're opening a second location. I couldn't help smiling. That's wonderful. I was hoping you'd be there for the grand opening. I wouldn't miss it. He laughed. I knew you'd say that. After we hung up, Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You look proud. I am. You should be. For the next several weeks, the whole family talked about the new store. The building was nearly 3 times larger than the first one. There would be expanded inventory, a dedicated paint department, rental equipment, even a small coffee station for customers waiting on special orders. It sounded impressive. Every time Ethan described another improvement, I found myself remembering the old store. The cracked concrete floor, the leaky roof, the shelves we assembled ourselves because we couldn't afford new fixtures. Funny how success can make humble beginnings feel even more precious. A few days before the opening, I stopped by the original store. I wanted to tidy up the front entrance before the celebration. As I reached for my brass key, Tyler opened the door from inside. Oh, John, he said cheerfully. We usually keep this unlocked now until the morning crew gets here. I smiled. Old habits. He grinned. I guess so. He wasn't dismissing me. He was simply living in a version of the business that no longer needed the routines I had created years earlier. Driving home that afternoon, I reached into my pocket and rolled the brass key between my fingers. The metal felt warm from my hand. I remembered the morning Ethan had given it to me. He had dropped it into my palm and said with a nervous smile, "If you have the first key, Dad, I'll never have to worry about this place." At the time, I thought he was giving me responsibility. I didn't realize he was also giving me a memory that would someday become far more valuable than the building itself. The morning of the grand opening arrived bright and cool, with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes small-town America feel especially alive. Linda was already dressed before I came downstairs. She wore the navy blue jacket our granddaughter had given her for Christmas and a pearl necklace she saved for special occasions. You clean up pretty well, I teased. She smiled. So do you. I had almost reached for a newer polo shirt hanging in the closet. Instead, I chose the faded blue one with the embroidered company logo from the first store. There was a tiny spot of white paint near the sleeve that had never completely washed out. Linda noticed. You picked your favorite. I guess I did. She straightened my collar. That shirt has quite a history. So do we. The drive to the new store took about 25 minutes. As we turned into the parking lot, I had to slow down. Cars filled nearly every space. There were food trucks. A local radio station had parked its broadcast van near the entrance. Bright balloons floated above the building, and a large banner stretched across the front. Carter Home and Hardware, grand opening. I sat quietly for a moment before turning off the engine. Linda looked at me. What are you thinking? I smiled. I'm thinking your little kitchen table became all this. She reached over and squeezed my hand. No, she smiled gently. Our son's dream became all this. She was right. I never wanted the business to belong to me. Seeing Ethan succeed had always been enough. Inside, employees hurried from one display to another, making last-minute adjustments. Some of the faces were familiar. Many weren't. The company had grown faster than I'd realized. A young employee greeted us with a warm smile. Welcome. Coffee and pastries are right over there. I thanked him. Of course, he didn't know who I was. He'd only been hired a few weeks earlier. And somehow, I was glad for that. Near the front windows, Ethan stood talking with the mayor and a reporter from the local newspaper. When he spotted us, his face lit up. He walked over immediately and hugged Linda first. Then he hugged me. I'm so glad you made it. I told you I wouldn't miss it. He looked exhausted, excited, proud. Exactly the way he had looked on the day we first unlocked the original store together. We've got a lot going on, he said. But after the ribbon cutting, we'll take a family picture. Sounds good. He hurried away before anyone could call his name again. Linda watched him disappear into the crowd. He's carrying a lot today. I know. And he's done a good job. He has. Neither of us noticed the stack of small white access cards resting neatly on a table beside the stage. At the time, they looked like nothing more than another detail in a busy celebration. I slipped my old brass key back into my pocket without giving it a second thought. If I had known what those little white cards were about to mean, I might have held on to that old key just a little tighter. The ribbon stretched across the entrance like a bright red promise. Families gathered near the front. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders. Employees lined up in matching navy shirts, laughing as someone adjusted balloons that kept drifting in the breeze. The mayor gave a short speech about supporting local businesses. A representative from the Chamber of Commerce thanked Ethan for investing in the community. People applauded. I applauded too, not because of the speeches, because I remembered the day Ethan almost gave up after the bank turned down his first loan application. Looking around now, it was hard to believe that frightened young man and the confident owner standing beside the ribbon were the same person. Linda leaned closer. You must be proud. I've never been prouder. The ribbon was cut. More applause. People streamed inside. For a few minutes, everything became wonderfully chaotic. Customers wandered through the aisles. Children grabbed free balloons. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the little cafe near the entrance. Someone turned on soft country music over the speakers. Felt less like a business and more like a neighborhood celebration. Then Ethan stepped onto the small platform near the customer service desk. I'd like to thank our team, he said. They've worked incredibly hard to make today possible. A young woman carried over the stack of white access cards I had noticed earlier. They'll give everyone full access to the new building, including inventory rooms and employee entrances. One by one, names were called. Store managers, department supervisors, cashiers, warehouse staff, maintenance workers. Even Tyler received one. Everyone smiled as Ethan placed a card into their hand. The room filled with applause after every name. I stood beside Linda, smiling just as proudly as everyone else. Without thinking, I slipped my hand into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the old brass key. It had become a habit over the years. Whenever I felt proud or nervous, I found myself touching it. Eventually only one card remained. Ethan picked it up. He looked across the crowd. For just a second, our eyes met. He smiled. The same warm smile I'd seen since he was a little boy. I smiled back, certain he was about to call my name. Instead, he looked past me. Rachel, a young assistant manager, stepped forward from somewhere behind us. Everyone applauded again as Ethan handed her the final card. I waited. For one brief second, I honestly believed Ethan had forgotten one card on another table. That would have made perfect sense. People forget things when they're busy. Fathers understand that. Then the music started again. People began walking away, and I realized nothing had been forgotten. The ceremony ended. Music started again. People moved toward the refreshment tables. Employees compared their new cards, laughing as they clipped them onto their shirts. No one seemed to notice that I was still standing exactly where I'd been. Linda gently slipped her arm through mine, without saying a word. She had seen it too. I slowly opened my hand inside my pocket. The brass key rested quietly against my palm. Smooth, heavy, familiar. For the first time since Ethan had placed it there years ago, it no longer felt like the key to a business. Felt like the last small reminder that I belonged to a chapter everyone else had already finished reading. Linda didn't say a word on the drive home. Neither did I. The radio played softly in the background, but neither of us was listening. About halfway home, she reached across the center console and rested her hand on mine. Maybe there weren't enough cards. I smiled. It was the kind of smile two people share after decades of marriage. A smile that says, asterisk, thank you for trying. Asterisk, we both know there were enough. She looked out the passenger window. I know. That was the end of the conversation. Not because we had nothing else to say. Because sometimes the truth arrives so quietly that speaking it out loud only makes it heavier. The following Monday, I did what I had done for years. I drove to the original store before sunrise. The parking lot was still empty except for 2 employee cars. The morning air smelled like fresh-cut grass and damp pavement after an overnight rain. I reached into my pocket for the brass key. Before I could slide it into the lock, the front door opened from the inside. Tyler smiled. "Morning, John. Morning. You don't have to unlock anymore." He pointed toward a small black security panel mounted beside the entrance. "We switched everything over to key cards after the new store opened." I nodded. "I heard." He held the door open for me. I stepped inside. Everything looked familiar. The shelves. The smell of lumber. The coffee pot already brewing near the service counter. Yet something felt different. Not the building. My place inside it. A few minutes later I walked toward the employee break room. The old cork bulletin board had been replaced by a large digital screen. Work schedules. Announcements. Safety reminders. Everything rotated automatically. My name wasn't anywhere. Not on the weekly schedule. Not on the maintenance assignments. Not even on the volunteer list for Saturday's community fundraiser. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to convince myself I simply wasn't looking carefully enough. Rachel walked by carrying a clipboard. "Oh, good morning, Mr. Carter." "Morning." She smiled warmly. "I'm glad you came by." There was no awkwardness in her voice. No disrespect. She genuinely seemed happy to see me. Then she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "Were you dropping something off for Ethan?" For just a second, I couldn't answer. Dropping something off? I almost laughed. For years, I had opened this building before anyone else arrived. Now someone honestly believed I was just a visitor. I smiled instead. "No, I was just checking on things." "That's nice." She hurried away before another customer reached the counter. She hadn't done anything wrong. She simply didn't know. She had been hired after the company started growing. To her, I wasn't part of the business. I was the owner's father, a kind older man who stopped by every now and then. I slowly walked back outside. Before getting into my truck, I looked through the front window. Employees moved confidently through their morning routines. Phones rang. Customers smiled. Orders were loaded into pickup trucks. The business was running beautifully, exactly the way I had always hoped it would. And for the first time, I realized something that hurt far more than not receiving an access card. The store hadn't pushed me away. It had simply grown into something that no longer needed me every morning. And somehow, that realization hurt far more than I expected. The next morning, I didn't drive to the store. For the first time in nearly 3 years, I stayed home. Linda didn't mention it. She simply poured my coffee, placed 2 slices of toast on the table, and sat across from me. The house felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just unfamiliar. For years, our mornings had followed the same rhythm. I left before sunrise. She watered the flowers after I pulled out of the driveway. Then we'd meet again at dinner, trading stories about our day. Now, at 7 o'clock, I was still sitting in my own kitchen. Linda looked up from her coffee. "What are you thinking?" I smiled faintly. "I'm trying to remember what retired people do on a Tuesday." She laughed. It was a soft laugh. The kind that gently reminds you life isn't over. "We'll figure it out." I nodded. "I know." But the truth was, I wasn't grieving retirement. I was grieving routine. Later that afternoon, Ethan called. "Hey, Dad." "Hi, son. I just wanted to check in." We talked for less than 4 minutes. He told me how busy both stores had been since the grand opening. A supplier was coming in next week. The local newspaper had written a nice article. The parking lot at the second location had been full all weekend. I listened. I was genuinely happy for him. Before hanging up, he said, "We should get lunch sometime." "I'd like that." "Okay, I'll look at my schedule." Then the call ended. Linda looked over from the living room. "How's Ethan?" "Busy." She nodded. I figured. Neither of us mentioned the access card. Neither of us mentioned the ceremony. Some things don't disappear because people ignore them. They simply settle quietly between conversations. A few days later, Linda suggested we stop by the farmer's market downtown. As we walked past the bakery, an older gentleman recognized me. "John." I turned and smiled. It was Frank Wilson, one of the very first customers from Ethan's original store. He shook my hand enthusiastically. "I stopped by the hardware store Monday." "Did you?" "Yeah." He looked around before asking, "Were you off that day?" I hesitated. "I've been taking it a little easier lately." He smiled. "I'll tell you something." He leaned closer. "It didn't feel quite the same." I chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure they're doing just fine." "They are." He nodded. "But businesses are funny. You can replace shelves. You can replace computers. You can even replace the front door." He paused. "But you can't replace the person who always remembered your name." I didn't know what to say. Frank patted my shoulder. "Tell Ethan I said congratulations." "I will." As Linda and I walked back toward the truck, she slipped her arm through mine. I looked down at the small paper bag of fresh apples we had just bought. For the first time since the grand opening, I realized something important. Maybe my value had never been the key in my pocket. Maybe it had always been the quiet things no one thought to measure. The smile at the front door. The familiar handshake. Remembering a customer's name after 10 years. Those things never appeared on a balance sheet. But somehow, they were the reason people kept coming back. I just wondered if my own son had forgotten that before I did. Ethan didn't notice anything was wrong at first. Why would he? From where he stood, both stores were thriving. Sales were climbing. Customers were happy. Employees were settling into their new routines. Every goal he'd worked toward seemed to be falling into place. Life had become a series of meetings, supplier calls, payroll reports, and expansion plans. He wasn't trying to forget me. He simply had too many things demanding his attention. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. About 2 weeks after the grand opening, Ethan stopped by the original store early one morning. He was walking through the sales floor with Tyler, discussing inventory for the holiday season. As they passed the front counter, an older couple came through the entrance. The husband looked around for a moment. Then he smiled politely at Tyler. "Is John off today?" Tyler hesitated. "I'm sorry, John. The gentleman who's always here in the mornings." Tyler smiled apologetically. "He hasn't been working much lately." The customer nodded. "Oh." He looked genuinely disappointed. "Tell him Bill and Martha stopped by." "I will." A few minutes later, another customer asked the same question. Then another. One woman even walked halfway through the store before turning back. "I thought John would know which water heater I bought a few years ago." Rachel offered to look it up on the computer. The woman smiled. "I'm sure you can." But John always remembered without looking. She wasn't criticizing anyone. She was simply remembering someone who had made her feel welcome. By lunchtime, Ethan had heard my name more times than he had all week. On his way back to the office, he stopped beside Tyler. "Has Dad been coming in at all?" Tyler shook his head. "Not since the Monday after the grand opening. I figured he was just taking some time off." "So did we." Tyler paused for a second. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "I always thought your dad worked here." Ethan looked surprised. "He did." Tyler frowned slightly. Then, why wasn't he at the staff meeting after the opening? Ethan didn't answer immediately. "I don't know." That simple sentence stayed with him longer than he expected. Later that afternoon, while reviewing customer surveys online, he noticed several comments mentioning the same thing. Asterisk. "Tell John we missed seeing him." Asterisk. Asterisk. "Hope John is enjoying retirement." Asterisk. Asterisk. "The new staff is great, but John always made us feel like family." Asterisk. There was nothing negative about the reviews. In fact, they praised the business. Still, every compliment seemed to be carrying the same quiet message. Someone important was missing. For the first time since opening the second store, Ethan stopped looking at sales numbers. Instead, He stared through the office window toward the front entrance. He pictured the man who had unlocked that first building before sunrise. The father who always arrived before everyone else. The father who never asked for a title. Never asked for recognition. Never even asked for a paycheck. Then, almost without warning, a memory returned. The morning of the grand opening. The stack of white access cards. The last one in his hand. His father standing only a few feet away. Waiting. Smiling. And suddenly, Ethan searched for a reason. But every explanation sounded smaller than the silence he'd left behind. A few days passed before Ethan came to see us. He didn't call first. He didn't text. Late Saturday afternoon, Linda glanced through the front window while she was watering the flowers. "John." I looked up from the newspaper. "I think Ethan's here." I walked onto the porch just as he stepped out of his truck. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from long hours. The kind that comes from thinking too much. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, son." Linda quietly disappeared back inside. She knew this conversation belonged to the two of us. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. "I brought something." He held out a small white envelope. Inside was a brand new access card. My name had been printed neatly across the front. John Carter. I looked at it for several seconds without saying a word. Finally, Ethan took a slow breath. "I'm sorry. I've been trying to figure out how this happened. I honestly don't know. I kept telling myself the cards were for active employees. Then I told myself you'd probably retire soon anyway." He looked down at the porch floor. "But none of those reasons explain why I never asked how you'd feel." His voice had become quieter. "I wasn't trying to leave you out. He stopped. "I got so busy building the future that I forgot who helped me build the beginning." Those words stayed between us. Simple. Honest. Without excuses. I looked at my son. Not the business owner. Not the man standing in newspaper photographs. I saw the young father who once sat beside me on the tailgate of my pickup truck after Little League games. The teenager who had borrowed my tools to fix his first apartment. The nervous young man who had spread blueprints across my old workbench and whispered, "Dad, I think this could work." He was still that same person. He had simply lost sight of something important along the way. I smiled. "You know, I never wanted the card." He looked surprised. What hurt wasn't missing the card. It was believing I'd stopped belonging. His eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted you to feel that way. I know. And I meant it. Because somewhere over the past few weeks, I'd realized something too. Love doesn't always disappear all at once. Sometimes it simply gets buried beneath schedules, responsibilities, and the noise of everyday life. That doesn't make the hurt any smaller. But it does make forgiveness easier." Ethan held the access card out once more. "This belongs to you. This time, I accepted it. Not because it opened a door at the store, but because it opened something much more valuable. A conversation we should have had long before the ribbon was ever cut. The conversation on our front porch lasted less than 20 minutes. But somehow, it lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Ethan stayed for dinner that evening. Nothing fancy. Linda made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and the apple pie she'd been baking for more than 40 years. The same meal she always prepared whenever our family had something worth celebrating. At first, the conversation felt careful. We talked about the grandchildren, the weather, football, anything except the store. Then Ethan set down his fork. "Dad, I've been thinking about something Frank Wilson said." I looked up. "He told me the business didn't feel the same without you." I smiled. "Frank has always been kind." "It wasn't just Frank." Ethan shook his head. "So many customers asked where you were. I kept wondering why." Linda reached over and quietly refilled everyone's iced tea. She never interrupted. She simply gave conversations room to breathe. Finally, I answered, "I don't think they missed me because I knew where everything was." Ethan listened carefully. "They missed being recognized. When someone walks into the same store for 10 years, They don't just want to buy a hammer. They want someone to remember that their grandson finally graduated, or ask whether the porch project turned out the way they hoped. Ethan slowly nodded. I've been so focused on making the stores bigger, I forgot what made the first one feel small in the best possible way. No one spoke for a few moments. Sometimes silence isn't uncomfortable. Sometimes it's where understanding quietly grows. After dinner, Ethan helped Linda carry dishes into the kitchen. I wandered into the living room. In the corner stood a small oak cabinet that had belonged to my father. Inside its bottom drawer rested a wooden box no larger than a shoebox. I kept little pieces of family history there for years. Old photographs, a pocket knife that had belonged to my grandfather, the receipt from the very first cash register Ethan and I bought at an auction, and, of course, the old brass key. I opened the lid. The metal caught the warm light from the table lamp. Without thinking too much about it, I reached into my shirt pocket and took out the new access card Ethan had given me that afternoon. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I laid it gently beside the brass key. Not on top of it. Not replacing it. Just next to it. Ethan had quietly walked into the room without me noticing. He stood behind me for a second before speaking. You kept the key all these years. I smiled. It opened the first chapter. He looked down at the two objects resting side by side. I guess this one starts another. I closed the lid softly. I think they belong together. For the first time in weeks, neither of us was talking about a key or a card. We were talking about something much harder to lose and much more important to find again. The following Monday, I drove to the original store for the first time since Ethan had visited our house. Not because anyone expected me. Not because I planned to start working again. I simply wanted to stop by. The parking lot looked exactly as it always had. Morning sunlight reflected off pickup trucks. A delivery driver was unloading lumber. Someone laughed near the garden center. Life had moved forward, just as it should. As I walked through the front entrance, Tyler looked up from the service counter. Good morning, John. Morning. He smiled. It's good to see you. I smiled back. It's good to be here. There was no awkwardness. No ceremony. No speech. A few regular customers recognized me immediately. John, I was wondering where you'd been. One gentleman held up a box of screws. I still need your advice. I laughed. I don't know if I'm still qualified. He grinned. Experience doesn't retire. For the next 20 minutes, I answered a few questions, shook a few hands, and caught up with people I'd known for years. Then I looked toward Ethan's office. He was talking with two suppliers. He glanced up through the glass window. Our eyes met. Instead of waving me over, he simply smiled. It wasn't the hurried smile of a busy owner. It was the smile of a son who knew his father was exactly where he belonged. I smiled back. Then I turned toward the front door. I didn't need to stay all day. I didn't need a schedule. I didn't need a title. For the first time in a long while, I understood something that retirement had been trying to teach me all along. Purpose was never the store. It was the people waiting for me when I came home. Purpose is knowing that the people you love still have a place for you in their lives. That evening, Linda and I sat on our front porch with 2 cups of coffee as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. She looked at me and smiled. You seem lighter. I am. Did you use your new access card today? I reached into my pocket and held it for a moment. Then I smiled. No. She raised an eyebrow. No, I didn't need to. When we went inside, I opened the little wooden box one last time. The old brass key rested quietly beside the white access card. Neither one was more important than the other anymore. One reminded me where our family's journey had begun. The other reminded me that love sometimes loses its way, but it can still find its way home. I closed the lid gently, not because the story was over, but because it had finally found peace. Thank you for spending this time with me. Stories like this remind me that families are rarely broken by one big moment. More often, they're shaped by the small moments we overlook and healed by the small moments we choose not to miss. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Do you think Ethan truly forgot his father? Or do you believe success simply distracted him until he couldn't see what had always been right in front of him? And if you were John, would you have accepted the new access card? Or would you have quietly walked away? Thank you for listening. Until next time, take good care of yourself, and never underestimate the quiet people who helped build the life you have today.